We'll start the shiur with the first of the questions, which is coming after Shavuos. So we have a change. Someone asked me about this change in Chabad Nusach, where in the Minchasa V'Niskeim on Shavuos. So we normally say Minchasa V'Niskeim, we mention the korbanos of the day in the Musaf, and on Shavuos, instead of saying soil lechatos, we say shnei seirim lechatos. The reason for the shnei seirim is because on Shavuos there are two sets of korbanos. Like every Yomtov, you have the musaf of the day. In addition, on Shavuos we would have the shtei halechem, which was from the new harvest, the first time they were brought for wheat as a korban, as a mincha. So that was brought on Shavuos. So the oimer was brought from barley, and that was on the second day of Pesach, and the shtei halechem is brought on Shavuos. That would be accompanied with a whole set of korbanos, of oilus, etc., and also with the soil lechatos. So there was two chatois. One was from the Musafin, will be. One from Musafin, and one got to do with shtei halechem. And it's the recognition of this that the Alter Rebbe changed, instead of saying on Shavuos soil lechatos, to say shnei seirim lechatos. So someone asked me why was it added? So I said, actually the question is the other way around, which I don't really have an adequate answer. Why don't we go through the whole seder of shtei halechem on Shavuos? And similar question, why don't we have in davening the seder of the hakrovas korban ha'omer? Why is there not no davening, no section, no mention in davening of the whole seder of the omer? At any rate, this we have here. This is from a very rare sefer where he talks about the Alter Rebbe's nusach, and he says that we mention the korbanos of Musaf, the shtei halechem are there just to allow us to eat from chodesh. Therefore, it's not necessary to mention them. And then he says, but the soil, because the goat is coming for kapora, that's why we don't want to miss out on that. So the korban oilo, they are just as a doiren, just as a gift. Therefore, it's not so essential to mention them. Whereas the korban chatos is essential to mention, and therefore we have the mention of the shnei seirim. Okay, let's move on to a practical question. About making ice cream on Yomtov. So these are a few questions which came up on Erev Yomtov. One was, as I say, about making ice cream. Now, we have an idea of noilad. And in the times of the Gemara, they didn't necessarily have facilities to make ice or to make ice cream. But they did, if they did have ice. And so to take ice and make it into water, that is forbidden on Shabbos. That's called moilid. This is creating a new entity. Before it was ice, and now it's become a runny liquid, a fluid. So to do that on Shabbos is forbidden. So now, if making ice into water is forbidden, it would follow that making water into ice is equally forbidden. So that's where we have this thing about not making ice on Shabbos. So we've got here two quotes. So on the right side, I believe it's from Hilchos Shabbos in Piskei Teshuvos, where he's telling us that, so let's read that text inside. From what we've discussed so far, he says, now you can understand that you're not allowed to make mayonnaise on Shabbos, because you make mayonnaise by mixing eggs forcefully, beating them together with oil and some other spices. And for that matter, you wouldn't be allowed to make ice cream on Shabbos, which involves also whisking, etc., with eggs, margarine and sugar, perhaps milk. And for that matter, he says also to make a froth for take coffee and sugar and to mix it to make a froth would also be an inyan of lisho as well as moilid. So we have here that on Shabbos we wouldn't be allowed to make a new metzias. Before it was one form, and to change its form totally. So that's the issue of moilid. What about Yomtov? And obviously the hergish is, if you're allowed to take flour and mix it and make a cake on Yomtov, we don't do it because we've got everything with machines nowadays. But you could, theoretically, you could make a cake on Yomtov. So if you're allowed to bake, why should moiled be and noiled be also? So now this is on the left side of the page. This is from Piskei Teshuvos in Hilchos Yomtov. And he's saying that you're not allowed to do moiled on Yomtov. That's why we're not allowed to strike a match on Yomtov, because you're creating a new thing. A similar thing is that you're not allowed to impregnate a fragrance into garments. And okay, then he says, some say that even if it's for food, moiled is forbidden. And therefore you shouldn't melt margarine, and you shouldn't be melting cubes of ice. Others disagree, and they say no, that noiled and moiled is when you create a new entity, like creating a fire. But if you're just changing its form, especially when it's got to do with food, that would be okay. So coming back to the question which was asked, which I felt was, I said it would be okay. The question was asked, there's a way of making ice cream, apparently, by shaking up the ingredients inside a bag inside a bag. The outer bag has got ice and salt, and the inner bag has got the sugar and whatever else you make ice cream with. And so to do that as an activity with the kids on Yomtov. So I felt that would be okay. To do so on Shabbos wouldn't be okay. Let's move on. Similar question. Someone sent me a picture of this whipped cream, and it's in an aerosol, the way I understand.
Wasn't clear what's okay, Shabbos and Yomtov, so repeat it again.
Okay, so just to summarize that last point, to make ice cream or mayonnaise on Shabbos, the answer is no, and to do it on Yomtov would be okay. Now, producing whipped cream from an aerosol, so it looks like inside the aerosol, I've never been inside, but I understand that inside they've got the ingredients and there's air pressure. And then when it comes out, it's going to produce a foam. And so it's a very similar question to making the ice cream. So this is now a quote, this time it's from Shmiras Shabbos Halocho, where he says, if you've got food inside a tube, you're allowed to push them like in a forcing bag. That's not a problem of memareach, of smoothing, etc. But he says, if you want to create a particular shape, that wouldn't be okay. There could be some kind of forcing bags which would create a particular shape. That would not be okay. Then what's relevant to us is the next point, which he says, the second paragraph. He says, you shouldn't use on Shabbos or Yomtov a spray which is going to create a solid cream on a cake. So it's a spray which creates icing. So, and he says that's a problem of moiled, that you see note Mem Zayin, because the spray inside the container is liquid, and then it becomes a solid as it comes out of the container. So I still think that we just saw that for Yomtov, that moiled making food would be okay, and for Shabbos, using this thing to create a cream on Shabbos would not be okay, but on Yomtov I think it would be okay. Let's move on. Okay. Now here is a very interesting question. It was last Thursday, and a boy called me. He's from New York. He called me, and he's a chosen, and he's going to meet the Kala. So I'm not sure whether he's already engaged or not, but he was very concerned that his nails are very long, and he felt embarrassed to meet the Kala with long nails. So he was asking me, is there a way that he's allowed to cut his nails on Thursday? So we all know, and this is a quote now from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, the upper quote is, the many who are particular not to trim the nails on Thursday, because the nails start regrowing on the third day, and and it's undesirable that they should be growing on Shabbos. And it's a very strange halacha, if I may say, because you're allowed to plant seeds on Thursday and Friday, even though they're going to grow on Shabbos. So why all of a sudden do we worry about trimming nails and they're going to grow in 3 days' time, 2 days' time, however you work it out? Now, this meaning of not trimming nails on Thursday goes back to perhaps late Rishonim. The lower quote we have is from the Sefer Matei Moshe. Matei Moshe was a Talmud of Marshal, which puts him about 400 years ago. And he says something that till Wednesday, it belongs to the past week. And from Wednesday onwards, it belongs to the future. As we say by Havdalah in Motzei Shabbos, if you didn't make Havdalah till Tuesday nightfall, you can still make Havdalah. Therefore, his hilokut sipornov miyom revi v'holo kadei sheyi atikun lekvod Shabbos. That's a bit unclear what he's saying. He seems to be encouraging you to cut your nails in the latter part of the week. The way the Mishnah Brura in Siman Reish Samach, he learns the following. You trim your nails, and then it comes Shabbos, and it's obvious you didn't trim your nails to cover Shabbos. You trimmed them on Thursday, not on Friday. Why did you cut your nails earlier in the week? Why didn't you cut them before Mamash Erev Shabbos? That doesn't look right. It looks like you are looking after your cosmetic needs, not to cover Shabbos, but for yourself, something on those lines. Therefore, you don't trim your nails on Thursday because they'll start growing on Shabbos. It'll be obvious that you didn't trim your nails to cover Shabbos. That's the way the Mishnah Brura learns. I just now saw that others disagree with that way, and it's not so evident in the Alter Rebbe either. But that's the way he learns, and I'm quoting from the Eliyah Rabbah. At any rate, that was the basis of my psak, which I told him. My advice was to him like this. Again, remember, it was the chassan, and he has to meet his kala, and he's worried that his nails look very unkempt. So I told him, trim your nails now, but don't cut them all the way down. And then on Friday, you'll trim them again. So then, it'll come Shabbos, his nails were trimmed to cover Shabbos. In fact, he trimmed them on Thursday. Well, that doesn't matter because they were trimmed again le cover Shabbos. I think perhaps even according to the other ways of learning, that advice might remain valid. Let me take a look at the chat. Nails grow from the base, not from the top. Within 24 hours, the nails lose their sharpness. Why not Erev Shabbos? So they are not sharp. Okay, I don't know the answer to that. You see, someone's asking why should you not trim your nails on Thursday to avoid them being sharp on Shabbos. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so here's an interesting question. A boy called me up on Sunday on Erev Yomtov that he is in Eretz Yisrael and is keeping 2 days because he's a chutznik, and so he's keeping 2 days Yomtov. He's planning ahead. What should he do on the second day of Yomtov? Could he go and do Mivtzat Tefillin? Could he go, I don't know, Shalayim, whatever it may be, do Mivtzat Tefillin on the day which for him is the second day of Yomtov? So I was able to find that Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was asked about a person who's keeping 2 days Yomtov in Eretz Yisrael, but he wants to be choshish. There are the shidduch of Chacham Tzvi. There are those who hold that you should be keeping only 1 day. So he doesn't want to miss a day of tefillin. But on the other hand, he puts on tefillin muksa. So Reb Shlomo Zalman says that tefillin are that like any keli, which is muksa. For example, a screwdriver is muksa. But you are allowed to move a screwdriver if you need the space, or if you need to use it for a permitted thing. Let's say to use it to wedge a door open. So we've got the klal that muksa, a keli, which is mlachta le'isser, you're allowed to move it letzorich gufo yom. So now, if you want to use the tefillin for a permitted activity on Shabbos or Yom Tov, they're not muksa. So on that basis, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman says, don't worry about muksa. You're allowed to put on tefillin, even if you're keeping Yom Tov. You'd like to be machmir to put on tefillin. So certainly he can use the tefillin to put on tefillin with yidden. Here, just want to point out an interesting diuk, I think, which I heard from Rabbi Telsner, going back a few years, that the Lashon Poskim Mishnah Brura is that tefillin are a klisha malachta l'isser, whereas the Alter Rebbe in Simshin Siman Shin Ches, where Hilchos Muktzah, he says, Eino keklisha malachti leheter. He uses like a roundabout lotion. Doesn't want to say it's a klisha malachti. Let's move on. So the answer to that was the boy would be allowed to go on with tefillin because the tefillin being used for a permitted activity is okay. Now here's a very interesting question which I got and I didn't find a satisfactory answer or not a clear answer. And that was in one town in Europe, they did not get a minyan on the first day of Yomtov. On Monday, the first day of Shabbos, they didn't get a minyan. On Tuesday, they did get a minyan. And so then they were had a dilemma what Kriyas HaTorah should they do on the Tuesday? Should they do Kol HaB'chayr, in other words, the Parsha, which talks about Shiva Shavuos Tisparloch, which talks about counting 7 weeks and having the Yomtov, or should they do the reading of the first day of Yomtov, which is describing by Yom HaShlishi, talking about Matan Torah. So this is their dilemma. We normally, on the first day, we learn about Matan Torah, and the second day we learn about the day of Shavuos. And he's asking what should he do. So let's first perhaps go down to, this is the quote from the Gemara, Megillah, Daf Lamed Aleph. So the Mishnah had said that on Shavuos, the reading is Shiva Shavuos, which is, as I said, that's Kol HaB'chayr in Parshas Re'eh. So Ba'atzeres Shiva Shavuos Umaftirim B'Chabakuk. Acherim Oimrim, the second opinion says, no, on Shavuos you should read B'Chodesh HaShlishi. I said before, B'Yom HaShlishi, sorry. B'Chodesh HaShlishi, that's Sivan talking about Matan Torah. Umaftirim B'Merkava. And the Haftorah is all about the vision of Yecheskel of the heavenly throne, etc. Now that we've got 2 days, we do both. We do one day Shiva Shavuos, about the event, the idea of Shavuos, and the other day we do about Matan Torah, the story of Matan Torah, but we switch it around. And what that means is we just mentioned the first one says Shiva Shavuos, the second one says B'Chodesh HaShlishi, and we do B'Chodesh HaShlishi on the first day, and we do Shiva Shavuos on the second day. So this is the Gemara. So now, the idea of if you missed a Kriya on Shabbos to make up the following week, so this you can see on the right side of your screen, from the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Lamed Hey, and this is in the Rashi writing of the Ramo, Im bitlu Shabbos achas kriyas ha-parsho b'tzibur, if for whatever reason, which unfortunately was relevant to a lot of us last year, if the tzibur missed out reading a parsha, the Shabbos habo koyrin oisa parsha im parsha sheyachas leisa Shabbos. So next week you're going to do a double parsha, and you'll make up for last week. So the Poskim say obviously that doesn't apply for Yomtov. If for whatever reason on Yomtov they had missed a Kriya, you would not read that reading on the following Shabbos. It doesn't have anything to do with it. And obviously, in the cycle of the year, you're going to get there in any case. But what about within the Yomtov? Not whether you missed the Yomtov making up in the Shabbos. What about within the Yomtov? So the bottom of the page, we have here a quote from the Shari Ephraim, which is the specialist sefer on Kriyas HaTorah from Ephraim Zalman Magulis. In Bitlu Atzibo Kriya B'Yom Aleph Machmas Eza Siba. Now this is about Pesach. In that chapter, he's talking about the various Yom Tov, but Pesach. If for whatever reason they didn't do the Kriyas HaTorah on the first day of Pesach, Afal Pikein B'Yom Beis Yikru Shoir Chesev. They should Kadina. You should read the second day's reading on the second day. And the first day's reading, they'll join on, he says they'll make it up on the third day, which I don't understand exactly how that works out. So he seems to be saying that when you've got 2 days Yom Tov and you missed the Kriya on the first day, the second day you'll do the Kriya of the second day. Which according to this, on the second day of Shavuos, they should have done Kol HaB'chayr and Shiva Shavuos. Now, of course, because of all the tumult which Lubavitch at least are making about the inyan of reading Aseret HaDibros, so I can understand the sentiment that they would want to do the events of Matan Torah on the second day. They didn't mention the first day, on the second day. So now, this other quote, which you have to the left of your screen, this is from the Kaf HaChaim. This is in Siman Tov Tzadik Daled, in the Dinim of Shavuos. And he says, and that's fifth line down, Ulam imto b'yoim sheni, the Korah b'parshas im kesef ha'psolocho, there, no, the second line. V'chein hadin b'yoim sheni, im b'mkoim kol ha'b'choyer, Korah parshas matan Torah, if instead of the Shiva Shavuos, which is started kol ha'b'choyer, instead they read the parsha of matan Torah, so he says you're yotze. So certainly b'di'evad, they did the right, it's okay what they did. And what we're seeing a little bit, there's a certain flexibility because they both are addressing the themes of the day. There seems to be a little flexibility to be able to switch around a little bit. In Toft Peiches, I think, Prima Godin talks about during Chalamoid Sukkot, Chalamoid Pesach, if they switched around, so you can, the next day you can make up what you missed out yesterday, kind of thing. So there is a degree of flexibility, and as I told the fellow, if I had been in his place, I would have done the same thing. Right, let's move on. Okay, right. So I was asked this week about, does one make a brocha when putting up a mezuzah in a school building? So on the screen you have here from Shulchan Aruch, and this is Siman Reish Pei Vav in the Yer Deya, and it says Beis HaMedrash Poter Min Mezuzah. If there's a door between a Beis HaMedrash to a private dwelling, then you should put up a mezuzah. Then there's a second opinion, V'yesh oimrim shebeis HaMedrash chayev b'mezuzah. Some say that the Beis HaMedrash does need to have a mezuzah, v'nochoin lochosh l'divreihem, and one should take heed of those words, but you shouldn't make a brocha on a mezuzah being put up in a Beis HaMedrash. So that's written in Shulchan Aruch. So you put up a mezuzah in a Beis HaMedrash, it's without a bracha. On the left side is a quote from a sefer called Seichel Tov, one of these specialists for him on Hilchos Mezuzah, and he writes, "V'chede b'Talmud Torah hakavua lelimudei kodesh," a room in a Talmud Torah which is designated for limudei kodesh. So then it's got a din of Beis HaMedrash. Even if though the occupants are little children, it still has got kedusha. On the contrary, it's got even a greater kedusha. It's hevel she'ein bechet. The fact that they use the same classroom for limudei chayil, well, that's also l'tzoyrach, that to enable they should have limudei kodesh, they have also a bit of limudei chayil. So basically, what we see here is that a mezuzah in a school would be appropriate, but it would be appropriate without a bracha, like a Beis HaMedrash should put up without a bracha. Okay, let's go on then to the next thing which we have here, and that is a shliach sent me, he asked me in advance, and he sent me an actual sample of this, but he calls it, he's branded it as a kamuzuzah. He's on his shliach, and he comes in touch with students, etc., on campus, and they would like to have a mezuzah, but they don't want to get harassed because of it. So if you can see what I have in my hand, here's the mezuzah case. At the back, it's got a diagonal, so the mezuzah can be placed on a diagonal within this case. There's, if you can see here, it's got a rubber stopper where you take that rubber stopper, you'd put it up the mezuzah in this tube. So and then if you look closely, does it come up on the screen? You can see that it's got a shin, and it looks from the distance, it just looks like some sensor or a bell push or something. So it looks quite innocuous, and so this is this idea of having a discrete mezuzah case. And the basis of this, he asked me before making it, he asked me for whether it would be okay, and I felt it's definitely okay. And what you have on top of the screen to the right is a quote from Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Siman Yud Aleph in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says the following: if one is worried in a place where you're worried that your mezuzah gets stolen, so then you could excavate in the door frame and place your mezuzah inside the door frame, but it shouldn't be excavated a tefach away from the surface, because then it's not on the door frame. It should it'd be too far in. And it should also be noticeable that there is a mezuzah there. And okay. So that's the basis where we're coming from, that would have a mezuzah case, and if someone is close enough, they will see that it's got a shin, and that's an remembrance to the Shem, Shin Dalajud, Hashem's name. And it's a discreet way they can have their mezuzah without being worried of it being vandalized. And that's the basis of the halacha. We'll go on to our next question. Okay, so here one of our regular listeners lives in somewhere in the States, and a neighbor of his, a Goyish neighbor, brought him a bunch of garlic. And these look to me like what they call the onions, no, the green onions, what they called. Never mind.
Spring onions.
Thank you. So thank you for that.
U.S. it's called scallions.
Americans call scallions, right? So now they were cut by the goy with we don't know what, and so he's asking if they were cut with a kitchen knife, would he be allowed to eat those pieces of garlic? So here we have from Shulchan Aruch and Simon Tzadik Vav. Snoin, let's talk about dover charif, Michael charif, a sharp food. So it says snoin, which is a radish, or silko, whatever that is, beet, whatever it may be, shechot chom besakin shel bosar, which had been cut with a fleishike knife. It's a ben yoimoy, she'ena mekunoch, if it's greasy. Also le'ochlam b'cholov. So if radish was cut with a meaty knife, which is not perfectly clean, you wouldn't be allowed to have it with milk, unless you'd cut off the mokem hachatach. You'd have to cut off the trimmed part a little bit in the tilas mokem, which would mean you'd have to cut off about about a finger width, shehu ka'uve etzba, which is about 2 centimeters. Right. So if that's what you have to do from fleishik to milchik, and then we go on to sif base in the same siman. He says, if one had used a knife to cut garlic, onions, or creations, leek, I think, but tamcho and chrein, which is shekoyin chrein, kudyoytze bei mitvorim acharifim, or peres achamutz, etc. Dinam shova lechotach boitznoy. So it's the same din as having cut a radish. It goes in some detail. Now, what this left us with, there's not much to be done here with this with these onions, these garlics, because once it's cut off 2 centimeters, there's not going to be much food left there. I suggested he asks his benefactor whether he used what kind of knife he used. Did he use a gardening piece of equipment, or did he use a kitchen knife? He said it's just simpler just to throw it out. So that's it. I told him give it to a Goyish neighbor. Right, let's move on. Right, so someone's asking here on the chat, is one allowed to buy cut up fruit from and vegetables from a non-Jewish grocery? So what's unique about these products, which we're talking, these foods which we're talking about, that they are sharp, and because they are sharp, even if the knife hadn't been used in 24 hours, so there's a concept of mechal yalei l'shvach, that the sharpness would refresh. So generally we know that if a keli hasn't been used for 24 hours, so then the taste is gone a bit off. But that doesn't work if it's with a sharp food. So if it's a sharp food, you cannot buy it from a cut up fruit from a Goyish grocery. Other foods you would be allowed to. I'm not very comfortable about it, but you could, and just cut off a thin layer, which if you're worried that they used a non-kosher knife, the likelihood is, as you see on the screen here, it talks here about a food made of ginger or something, and he says that they would have special tools for that. The likelihood is in a shop, they probably would have knives which they basically use just for the vegetables, especially if it's a bigger shop, but you never know. So that's why I would still trim off a little bit, and it wouldn't have this kind of infectious nature of a dover charif. Right, let's move on then. Right, so here we have an interesting shiur. Someone, his business is he searches for commercial properties, and so they will specialize in finding. And now there's a restaurant chain, a franchise, and he has been finding for them restaurants, properties around the country, and they say to him, instead of us paying you a fee, a finder's fee for finding us these premises, we would offer you that you should become a stakeholder, obviously, the halachic restaurants. Yeah, we'll offer you an ownership or a dividend of the properties. And what their motive here is, besides it not costing them so much, but also that the finder will make it his business to find more suitable properties, more profitable venues, so that they would get a greater dividend in those properties. So the question is this allowed? Now we have a halocha, it's a whole simon in Shulchan Yeridea Kuf Yud Zayin, osula sois schoira de bidvorim asurim. We're not allowed to do trade with non-kosher produce. We're not talking about basa b'cholov, which is osa b'hanua. We're talking about selling meat, tray for meat, tray for chicken, whatever it may be, for stuff which is osam in Torah. Stuff which is osam midrabanon, you are allowed to trade with. Stuff which is osam in Torah, you're not allowed to trade with. And the question is, what's the reason for this? This is in Shuvas Chasam Sofer in Yeridea, Kuf Dalet, Kuf Hei Kuvov. He talks about a question of a businessman somewhere in Trieste, I think it was, or perhaps I'm mixing up. And there was a businessman somewhere in Europe at any rate, and he's got a business contact in Egypt, and apparently eels would be very lucrative to sell them in Egypt. So he wants to buy from a provider of eels somewhere in Europe in barrels, ship the barrels out to Egypt and sell them at a profit. And so the question was put to the Chasam Sofer. And the Chasam Sofer talks about this. What's the reason for not being allowed to trade in tray for food, in Dvorim Asurim? Is it because you might, as you're touching, handling with it, you might come to eat some of it, which would be a reason for a Jewish boy not to get a job in a Goyish delicatessen? Because they might, whilst they're on the job, might eat something, even though it's not theirs. On the other side, this fellow is a businessman; he's not touching the stuff. Or is it just a isur in a Torah? And the Chasam Sofer says the majority of poskim, save the Trumas Hadesh and all the rest of the poskim, hold that schoira b'dvarim asurim is isur in a Torah. So now, to actually own to be a partner in this restaurant, which is selling tray for food, I think that's one of the main parts of it. If it's just a side thing, just to keep the business running, that may be less of an issue. But if it's a set restaurant selling tray for food, it's a dover also. But here it's not mamish. As I spoke to the Rov who was put the shiur to me, here it's not mamish that he's going to own. It's more he's got like a share. Now he's got to have a share, and he's going to get it, but he has no opinion in running the company, what to buy, what to sell, etc. So it's a little bit less of an issue. So now I'm reading here from a sefer which is called Ben Yisroel L'Nochri, and it specializes in dinim between Yidden and Goyim, obviously. And in the section on Yeridea, he says the following: Yesh oisrim litein mois L'Nochri. Some say that you're not allowed to give money as an investment to a goy that the goy will then invest in non-kosher food, and the profit will then be shared. Although the goy's direct contact is the goy is in his shop, and the yid is not even there. So it's what we call a sleeping partner, is out of the picture, and there are those who say it's not allowed. Yesh matirium, and there are those who say that it is allowed. So, and I felt that since in this case is mamash a partner and still yesh matirin, in the case which I'm talking about now, he is not even a partner. It's just that he's getting a share of the profits, but he doesn't have any management kind of stake in it at all. I felt one could be to certainly rely on the more lenient opinion. The Chassam Sofer, back to the fellow with the eels. So the Chassam Sofer advises that instead of him owning, he should take a agency fee. That he will be the agent between introducing the vendors, the manufacturers of these eel barrels, and the contractor Mitzrayim in Egypt, and he'll make his money on as an agent rather than an actual vendor. Okay. Let's now go on to the next point, which we have here today. Baruch Hashem, we're getting through our agenda. Right. So here I got this question a day or two ago. What is the halacha about going into a bathroom, a toilet, with a siddur, but it's in your pocket inside the bag? Very many of us might have nowadays, since you got siddur on your phone, it's become less necessary to have a little siddur in your pocket. But be that as it may, so this is a question: are you allowed to enter with a siddur inside a bag or inside a wallet, inside and into the toilet? It says, and then the wallet is in your pocket. So now we've got here two sources, and one is in Siman Mem in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. That's on the right side. So let's go through this carefully. It's in the middle of a discussion about a beis haChosid, out in the field, and there it said the person who's wearing tefillin, those times they used to wear tefillin the whole day, that he would be allowed to go in with the tefillin wrapped up in his garments. And it says that's only allowed by tefillin she'odam loifshin kol hayoyim, because if a person wears them whole days, wearing these halachic members in the field also. And he's out in the field, wearing his tefillin the whole day, and he needs to relieve himself. What should he do with his tefillin? Run back home? It's not practical. How about taking off the tefillin and leaving them at the wayside and then going into this facility? Then, well, there's a worry that they might get stolen by passers-by. So therefore, because the tefillin are worn the whole time, and it's not practical to take them back home, therefore there's a concession that they may be taken into a beis haChosid wrapped up. Aval she'or sforim, but other sforim also lachnisum afilu bebeis haChosid shebasodeh beibigdoi biyodoi lahashtim miyushiv. He says, but a sefer that you wouldn't, there's no need for the concession. You can leave the sefer at home. Why do I have to give you a concession to have it with you and wrap it up in your clothes? You're not mechuyev to take a sefer with you. And he says, if they are in a pouch, you are allowed to. Then he says, but if a beis haChosid shebabayis, if it's in a house out in the field, if you have a siddur and it's inside a bag, you would be allowed to take it in. But if it's in the house and it's in the pocket, it says that's not allowed. Afilu bekisson, that you wouldn't be allowed to take it in. You'd have to leave it outside. Now this is quite a practical issue. A person does have a mincha or something, as I said, inside their wallet, and they want to use. It's not always practical every time to go when one goes in to take it out and find somewhere to put it safely and shouldn't get spoiled. So what about kiss betoich kiss? So this is if it's in one pouch, but if it's in a double pouch, the poskim say it's okay. In addition, some poskim maintain that this objection is more about a sefer which is written on parchment, like a Megillah, that kind of, which has got more kedusha. Whereas a printed sefer, some say it doesn't have that degree of kedusha. But if it's already inside a bag, inside your pocket, one could rely on the lenient opinion. Let's take a look at the second quote. Is from Simon Mem Gimel, and it talks about tefillin, and this was why the person asked me the question. It says here, if you have a tefillin in a bag together with a talus, yeah. Lefichach oison hamanichim kis hatefillin v'hatalis. They put the tefillin bag and the talus into a big bag. Harei gam kis hagodol, the larger bag, is called the bag of the tefillin. And v'tzorach oid kaili al gabon. So tefillin inside a talus bag, that would still be called, even though the tefillin are in a bag, it would be called, it's only in one bag. You still have to have another bag on the outside. Which I told him, I feel that this halacha is not talking about regular two bags, because we have a din of kis b'toich kis. Here is a unique halacha, that the tefillin inside the talus bag, it's as if the talus bag is there to honor the tefillin as well as the talus. And therefore, they're all called like one bag. But I don't think it has any bearing on generally having a bag inside a bag. One last point, which I found quite interesting. This person who sent me the question sent me a quote from the late Rav Falk, which would relate to one of the questions over here on the chat. Rav Falk said a very interesting point. That's in his Sefer Machzeh Eliyahu. A pocket. Most of our pockets are made as a little bag, and inside the jacket there's a slit in the lining, and the pocket is sewn into the slit. If you can understand, therefore the pocket is an independent bag, and it's somehow sewn into, and it's attached to the garment. As on that basis, most pockets would be a patoich kis, because the pocket is like an independent pocket cover, and then the jacket or the coat is another cover. So you got inevitably you're going to have kis b'toich kis. That's his position, which I find very interesting. To exclude, let's say, a shirt pocket. A shirt pocket is not a separate bag. It's like another patch of cloth sewn onto the surface of the shirt. That would not be, even according to his hat, it wouldn't be counted as kis b'toich kis. Let me just go up and see what we have here. Someone's asking, when traveling through the airport, tefillin and hand luggage, we come to the same issue when needing to use the restroom. The hand luggage would have to be brought into the restroom, so it shouldn't be stolen or tampered. It's absolutely right. And therefore, you're going to make a point that you should have a kis b'toich kis. So your tefillin would probably be kis b'toich kis in any case. What we're learning from here is that perhaps the siddur, well, he just said a basoda, you're allowed to take it in with one kiss, but if your siddur would be inside a bag, inside your carrier bag, that would be kiss b'toich kiss in any case. But I'm just looking over here that he says that besa kisse kavua basoda would be allowed one cover. So then, so that might answer that would be okay in any case in the airport, because that's like besoda. At any rate, if you want to be more machmir, so make sure that your siddur inside your bag would be inside. Have another bag. Let's go on to our last question for today, and that is, let's come back to the screen. Okay, so this is a question we have. So one of our regular listeners is in Russia, and quite north, and we are familiar that the Alter Rebbe says in the Dinim of Sfir Soimer, has a loshon of Medinos Elu Hatzfoinios, that dawn, the Alter Rebbe, let's explain something. We have a couple of minutes. It's very confusing. You look on the calendars and the earlier dawn, later dawn, what's it got to do with? So dawn is the word alos hashachar. Shachar means the blackness. And alos hashachar means when the blackness starts lifting, the blackness of night. The total blackness of night starts lifting because of the first ray of daylight. There's another Lashon, koichav hashachar. There's a morning star which would be like kind of heralding the dawn. So that's koichav hashachar. Alos hashachar means the blackness of night is lifting. So some poskim follow that it's just 72 minutes before sunrise. And that's based upon, in the Gemara, in Psochim, we get the impression that the difference between Alos HaShachar, which is dawn, and Netzach Hama, which is sunrise, is the amount of time it takes to walk 4 mil, which works out, according to many shittas, works out to be 72 minutes. Okay. And therefore, they are applying the shiur of 72 minutes before sunrise, regardless of which latitude, etc. The Alter Rebbe certainly disagrees with this. That's what the point which he makes over there in the Siddur, that dawn being before sunrise is that the 72 minutes is true in Eretz Yisrael at the times of the equinox, the times of Nisan and Tishri. But looking at dawn other times of the year, so the difference between dawn, the time difference between dawn and sunrise in winter will be longer than at the equinox, and in summer will be even longer. And then that, if that's true, 72 minutes is true for Eretz Yisrael, well, that's because it being about 30 odd degrees above the equator. But if you go further north, and very much further north, then the transition from dawn to sunrise can be much longer, can be 2 hours, can be 3 hours. And that's the Alter Rebbe's point, which he says, so dawn, it's at midnight, because it gets earlier and earlier to the point you can't go earlier than midnight. So therefore the Alter Rebbe says two things. After Yud Ches Iyar, after Lag B'Omer, basically, you cannot do Sfira So'im with a brocha after midnight. Because after midnight, it's already dawn, it's already the beginning of the next day. Second point, he says, on Shiva Osa B'Tammuz, you wouldn't be allowed to eat. Now, Shiva Osa, like most of the fast, besides Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, the other fast, they start from dawn. So the Alter Rebbe says, on Shiva Osa B'Tammuz, and B'din Yisrael Hatzfonius, from midnight, you're not allowed to eat because it's already, the fast has begun. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe is saying very clearly that dawn starts from, in these very northern parts of the world, in these months, June, July, it's going to start at midnight. So this fellow is asking the Chassidish man, and he sometimes will not have finished his learning for the day until nightfall, and sometimes he'll want to learn a bit longer after midnight. So then question, if it's already dawn, what about Birchas HaTorah? Does he have to do Birchas HaTorah? And he has another question. He's actually going to bed. Does he say Hamapil? In other words, now, in Hayom Yom, I think it says that there were 3 days in Lubavitch, the 3 days a year wouldn't say Hamapil, wouldn't say Krishma Shalamit, wouldn't say Hamapil, and they would be up a whole night. So here, Shavuos, by the time I came home, etc., it was already dawn, well after dawn, so I didn't say Hamapil. So you don't say Hamapil after dawn. It wasn't very light, but it was after dawn. So he's asking the question, do you say Hamapil after midnight in his region? And then he sent me another question, what about eating? And he's allowed to eat after without saying Birchas HaShachar. So these are the questions which he's asking. And so what you have in front of you is actually a note which I wrote in the Sefer Nesivim B'Sei Shlichus Chelik Gimel, and there's a first chapter is all about the Zmanim for Iceland. The Shliach is in Baruch Hashem, and Shliach Matzliach in Iceland. So he's asked for the times. So the point which is made over here is the following. Sometimes we say, if a person's got a particular, he's got his own nature is unusual. So we often will say, the fact that you are satisfied with this, but For other people, it's not normal. But when you have a whole region called Anshe Mekoimoi, so that becomes, if it's a whole country, that is considered normal, even though it's not normal for the rest of the world. But in this country, this is normal. So now in Iceland, to say that, what's the issue here? You're saying in Hamapil, you're saying Hashkivenu Avin L'Sholem. And Halocho, it's after dawn, it's not Zman Shchiva. It's not the time for going to sleep. How can you say Hashkivenu? But you know what? In this part of the world, for most of the people, most of the population are sleeping at this time. And therefore it is Zman Shchiva. So again, for an individual who decides to go to sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's really getting light, it's going to be perhaps a bit of a stretch to call it Zman Shchiva. You can argue. At 6 o'clock in the morning, for sure, it's not Zman Shchiva. People are getting up already by then. But in a region where the night is such a short night, and therefore people are sleeping at this time, and this is the normal practice in this country, then that should be called Zman Shchiva, and therefore it shouldn't be a problem to say Hashkivenu. Now, and then someone, this Rabbi Greenwald, sent me a few references who say very much the same svara. That's Shuvas Rabbi Kiva Yosef, that in places where it doesn't become night, so when one follows Zman Shchiva, that sleeping times for the local people would be called sleeping time, and another couple of references. And then another quote, the third paragraph, is from the Klosenberger Rebbe in his Divrei Yatziv. And he says another idea, that if there's a place where it doesn't get fully dark, but the sun does set, someone would count nightfall from sunset. So these regions, at any rate, so let's come back to the question about saying Hamapel after midnight. I think Yeshal Malismech to say, and the very fact the Alter Rebbe in his Siddur says, don't eat after midnight on Shivas B'Tammuz, and don't do Svir Soimer after midnight from Ayut Chesiyur. Why didn't he address the more common thing? Hamapil. People, I'm sure it was a common thing. And what about people about Birchas HaTorah? Why doesn't he address these things? It looks like he wasn't worried about them. And so possibly this was the svara, as I said, it's a Zman Shchiva, although technically it's already dawn, but colloquially it's still Zman Shchiva, you can still say Hamapil. With Birchas HaTorah, then I have another argument to be allowed to say, to not have to say Birchas HaTorah, and this is in Shuvas Maharshag. Shimon Greenfeld was a Rovin, I think, in Sombateli just before the war, and he writes the following, especially talking about Tikkun Leil Shavuos, and it's relevant in these parts of the world where it becomes dawn very quickly after midnight. So when do you finish your Tikkun? So ask a simple question. We know in Halocho that the day switches at nightfall. This morning was Yom Chamishi, now it's already Leil Shishi. Why don't I have to make a Birchas HaTorah right now? The sun is setting, is set. Why don't I have to make a Birchas HaTorah? It's a new day. Till now it was Chamishi, now it's Shishi. But rewriting a Ksubah or whatever it may be, I'd have to write Shishi. So Rabbeinu Yoina, I believe, says the following, Rabbeinu Brochus, that the night now is a hashloma for the day. That which you didn't manage to cover during the day, you have your quota of learning, and you didn't manage to cover it during the day, so you finish off at night. So it's like a follow-on. And therefore, the evening learning, the night learning, is kind of linked to the day's learning, the preceding day's learning, and you don't have to make a new bracha at nightfall. It's written in Rishonim. The Marshag, Reb Shimon Greenfeld, he takes this one step further. On Erev Shavuos, when you got up in the morning, you said Birchas HaTorah, you knew that tonight is going to be beginning Shavuos, and you knew that you're going to be up for the Tikkun Leil Shavuos, and that Tikkun Leil Shavuos may overspill. Okay, so your Birchas HaTorah kind of on the morning of Erev Shavuos, that included your learning, which is going to be in the overflow after dawn. That's his chiddush. I know, and certainly if it's a normal practice that a person sometimes in those regions does learn after Chatzos, I think he can rely on that and doesn't have to stop to say Birchas HaTorah. Just one last thing we have on the chat here. One of our listeners in Eretz Yisrael, and he says that here in Israel, everyone seemed to have a different time for Alos HaShachar. Even their later Zman was well before the Zman on Chabad.org. Well, I'm sorry, I can't really answer you without seeing more data. So you can send it to me and we'll be in touch afterwards. Meanwhile, I wish everyone a guten Shabbos and alles soll sein gesund. And we should meet b'soy v'smoches Tomet Kol Hayom. Kol Tov.
Good.